Revenge is a dish best served in the cold, quiet moments when the past finally catches up to the present. Experience the chilling reality of karma and the unwavering weight of justice in our latest series. Hit that subscribe button now and watch the truth unfold.
The nurse was still adjusting my IV when my phone rang. I answered because I recognized the ringtone I'd set for my mother. That's the only reason. My right hand was shaking, and the screen had a small crack I hadn't noticed before. And I answered anyway because that's what you do. That's what I'd always done. Something happened, I said. I'm in the ER. There was a pause, not a long one, maybe 2 seconds, but I've had a lot of time to think about those 2 seconds since then. What do you mean the ER? She said. I was in an accident, on the 94. A truck ran a red and hit the driver's side. The airbag deployed. They think my wrist might be fractured and they're worried about my head. I said it all in one breath, the way you do when you're trying not to cry. I'm at St. Raphael. I came in by ambulance. Another pause. Oh my God, she said. And then, hold on. I heard her put the phone down. I heard muffled voices, her voice and my father's, the way they talk to each other in that half-argument tone they've used my whole life. I stared at the ceiling of the examination bay. It was one of those drop ceilings with the foam tiles. I counted the tiles. There were 11 that I could see from where I was lying. She came back on. Your brother is having a really hard time right now, she said. I didn't say anything. He got a letter from the city this morning, that parking situation from last month. They're saying he owes $430 in fines. He's been on the phone with them for 2 hours, and he's completely falling apart. I looked at my wrist. It was already swollen, the skin pulled tight and shiny around the joint. The triage nurse had wrapped it loosely, pending the x-ray. Mom, I said, I was in a car accident. I know, sweetheart. Is it serious? Like, are you in danger? I don't know yet. They want to do a CT. A CT, she repeated. She said it back to me the way people repeat things when they're not really listening, just filling the silence while they think of something else. But you're stable? You're conscious? Yes. Okay. I heard something in her exhale. Relief, maybe. Or permission. Then your father and I are going to get your brother settled down first. He's really not in a good place. You know how he gets. I did know how he got. We'll come as soon as we can, she said. Which hospital? St. Raphael, on Cleaver. Okay, just sit tight. We'll be there. She hung up before I could say anything else. The nurse came back in. Younger than me, probably, with a badge that said Petra in block letters. And she looked at my face, and then looked away the way people do when they don't want to make it weird. Is there someone we can call for you? She said. A spouse? A partner? My husband, I said. His name is Joel. Joel answered on the second ring. He was in Cincinnati. He'd been there since Monday for a project his firm was wrapping up. A commercial build in the Kenwood area that had been dragging on for 6 months. He was supposed to come home Thursday. It was Tuesday. Babe. That's all he said. Just my name for me. Not my actual name, just that. And something in my chest cracked open a little. I'm okay, I said, before he could ask. I'm at St. Raphael. There was an accident on the 94. I'm okay. They just want to do some imaging. My wrist might be broken. Which exit? Joel, you don't have to. Which exit is the hospital off of? It's on Cleaver, off the 43. I'm looking up flights. I heard him moving, the sound of him already standing up, already in motion. That's how he is. He doesn't spiral. He just moves. There's one at 6:15 that gets in at 8:45. I'm booking it. You have the walkthrough tomorrow morning. Zach can run it? Joel, Mira. He said my name, my actual name, and his voice was completely steady. I'm coming. Send me the room number when they get you settled. I didn't argue. I learned a long time ago not to argue with Joel when his voice got like that. Steady and certain and warm all at once. He'd been that way since the day I met him at a work thing 6 years ago. At a conference I'd almost skipped because I had a headache. I'd almost skipped it. I think about that sometimes. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me. Just tell me how you're feeling. Scared, I said. My wrist hurts a lot, and my head feels fuzzy. Fuzzy how? Like when you turn a TV on and it takes a second to focus. Okay, I'm going to stay on the phone with you until they take you for imaging. Okay? Just keep talking to me. So I kept talking to me. So I kept talking. The CT came back with something. Not a bleed. The resident was very clear about that. Very careful to say it wasn't a bleed. But there was what he called a finding. A small area of concern near the temporal lobe that they wanted a radiologist to look at. It was probably nothing, he said. It was very likely nothing. But they wanted to keep me overnight for observation. I called my mother back. They're keeping me overnight, I said. There was something on the CT. They don't think it's serious, but they want to monitor me. Something on the CT, she said slowly. What does that mean? It means they found something they want to watch? They said it's probably nothing. Okay. Another pause. Your father is just finishing up with your brother. They're trying to get the city on the phone to dispute the fine. You know these things are sometimes just errors. $430 in city parking fines is not an error. My brother had been parking in a loading zone outside his apartment building for 8 months because he didn't want to pay for the garage spot. This had been a very specific and deliberate choice, and everyone in the family knew it, and we had all been very careful not to say so out loud. I'm being moved to a room, I said. Room 422. Joel is flying in. He'll be here around 9. Good, she said. That's good. See, you'll have Joel. I want you to hear that. I want you to really hear it. See, you'll have Joel. Like that was the answer. Like that was the response to their daughter lying in a hospital bed with something on her CT scan. I said okay. I said I'd talk to her later. I hung up, and I stared at the acoustic tile ceiling of my new room. This one had 14 tiles, and I thought about the first time I'd been in a hospital as an adult. I was 23. I'd had an emergency appendectomy. I'd called my parents from the pre-op room, terrified, barely able to form sentences. They'd come, both of them. My mother had held my hand until they wheeled me back. And my father had paced the waiting room for 2 hours and hugged me so hard when I came out that it hurt my incision site. That was 12 years ago. I'd spent 12 years trying to figure out what changed, and I still didn't have a real answer. My brother had gotten older maybe. More fragile or more demanding. I could never tell the difference with him. My parents had oriented themselves toward his chaos so gradually that I don't think they even noticed the tilt. It was like watching a building shift on its foundation, slow enough that you didn't see it happening. You just looked up one day and nothing was level anymore. Joel landed at 8:42. I know because he texted me from the gate before his phone went into airplane mode, and I'd been watching the clock since about 6. The room was quiet. A nurse came in every hour. The hospital had a particular smell, not unpleasant exactly, just chemical and flat, like the air had been cleaned of everything interesting. He walked through the door at 9:17 with his work bag still over his shoulder and his jacket wrinkled from the flight. And I started crying before he even got to the bed. Hey, he said. Hey, I'm here. He set the bag down and sat on the edge of the bed and put both arms around me, careful of the IV, careful of my wrist. I'm here. I've got you. I'm sorry you had to fly back, I said into his shoulder. Please stop apologizing. He pulled back and looked at me. Really looked at the bruising along my cheekbone from the airbag, at the splint on my wrist, at whatever my face was doing. Tell me everything. So I did. All of it. The accident, the phone calls, the CT, the finding that was probably nothing, the 14 ceiling tiles, and the part about my mother saying, "See, you'll have Joel." When I got to that part, he didn't say anything. He just held my hand a little tighter. "Have they called back?" he said. "Your parents?" My mom texted at 7. She said, "Hope they figure out the CT thing. Your brother is doing a little better." Joe looked at me for a long moment. "Okay," he said. And that was all he said about it. That's one of the things I love about him. He knows when there's nothing useful to add. We watched a documentary about deep-sea fish on my phone with the volume low, and he fell asleep in the chair next to my bed sometime around midnight, still in his work clothes, and I lay there in the dark thinking about the kind of love that books a last-minute flight and the kind that says, "See, you'll have Joel." My father arrived the next morning at 10:43. I know the exact time because the nurse had just come in for my 11 o'clock check and hadn't arrived yet. So I was alone. Joel had gone down to the cafeteria to get coffee. The timing felt almost cinematic, looking back, like something in the universe had a specific sense of irony. My father walked in with his coat still on, the big gray one he's had for 15 years. And he stopped in the doorway and looked at me, and I could see him taking inventory. The splint, the bruise, the IV, and something moved across his face that might have been guilt. Then his eyes went to the chair beside my bed. In the chair was my neighbor Deb. Deb is 61 years old. She is a retired high school chemistry teacher. She has lived 3 houses down from us for 4 years, and she brings us tomatoes from her garden every August. And she has strong opinions about bird feeders. She is, in almost every external measure, a completely ordinary person. She had shown up at the hospital at 7:30 that morning with a tote bag containing 2 kinds of soup, a paperback novel, a phone charger, and a crossword puzzle book. She'd texted me the night before. Joel had called her from the airport, and she'd said, "I'll be there at 7:30. Do you want the chicken tortilla or the minestrone?" She brought both. She was sitting in the chair doing the crossword when my father walked in. He looked at her. He looked at me. He looked back at her. "Who is this?" he said. "This is Deb," I said. "My neighbor." "Your neighbor?" "Yes." There was a very long pause. "Your neighbor," he said again, and something shifted in his voice. Something that was building. "Your neighbor is here, and you've been here since yesterday afternoon." "Yes," I said. "Why didn't you tell us it was this serious?" "Why didn't you say, 'I told you there was something on my CT,' I said. "I told you there was something on my CT," I said. "I told you they were keeping me overnight. I called you twice. Your brother was. I know what my brother was doing," I said. And that's when it happened. My father is not, in the general sense, a person who raises his voice. He manages. He controls. He redirects. It's a particular kind of emotional management I grew up watching. The kind where feelings get moved around rather than expressed, shifted from one container to another until nobody can remember where they started. But he raised his voice then. Not screaming. I want to be accurate about this. But loud. Loud enough that Deb set down her crossword. Loud enough that I heard someone pause in the hallway outside. "I don't understand," he said, and his voice cracked on the last word. "Why you always do this? One daughter is a doctor. 100 that's ballots. We have been dealing with a very difficult situation with your brother for years, and you know that. You have always known that. And for you to lie here feeling sorry for yourself while your neighbor, while a stranger, sits in that chair." "She's not a stranger," I said. My voice was very calm. I was surprised by how calm it was. She's someone who showed up. My father looked at me. What does that mean? He said. It means exactly what it sounds like. Joel came back 4 minutes later. He walked in with 2 coffees and one look at the room and set both cups down on the windowsill and stood next to my bed in that quiet way he has, not saying anything, just present. A full stop. My father glanced at him and something deflated slightly. Deb excused herself to give us privacy. On her way out, she squeezed my ankle through the blanket and said she'd be back in an hour, and my father watched her go with an expression I recognized. It was the expression he made when confronted with evidence of a world operating outside his expectations. The conversation that followed was long and circular and exhausting in the way that conversations with my father always are. He talked about sacrifice. He talked about my brother's anxiety diagnosis and the medication adjustments and the job situation. He talked about how hard my mother had been working to hold everything together. He talked about how they hadn't known it was so serious, or they would have come sooner. I let him talk. I've learned that you have to let him get through the whole structure of it before there's any space for anything else. When he finished, I said, "Can I ask you something?" He said yes. If it had been my brother in this bed, I said, would you have come? He didn't answer right away. That's not a fair question, he said. It's the only question, I said. He looked out the window. There wasn't much to see. A parking structure, a strip of gray March sky. He looked at it for a while. We made a mistake, he said finally. Not an apology. Not quite. But something. I know you did, I said. I was discharged the next afternoon. The finding on a CT was, as the resident had predicted, almost certainly benign. A small anatomical variation that had apparently always been there and would require a follow-up MRI in 6 months, nothing more. My wrist was fractured, a clean break at the distal radius, and I would be in a cast for 6 weeks. Joel drove me home. Deb had put a casserole in our refrigerator. My mother called while we were on the highway, and I let it go to voicemail. I listened to it that evening, sitting at the kitchen table with my casted arm resting on a folded dish towel. She said she was sorry they hadn't gotten there sooner. She said she hoped I was feeling better. She said my brother was doing a little better too, which I had not asked about, and that the city had agreed to reduce the fine by half, which I also had not asked about. She said at the end that she loved me. I believed her. That's the part people sometimes don't understand when I tell the story. I believed her then, and I believe her now. Love, in my family, has never really been the question. About 3 weeks after I got out of the hospital, my mother called to ask if I could help cover my brother's portion of their phone plan. He was between jobs. It would only be for a couple months. It wasn't a large amount, $90 a month, she said, which is still more than $1,000 a year. But I understood that math was not the point. I said no. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's surprising." "I know," I said. "You've always been so." She stopped, started again. "You've always helped." "I have," I said. "What changed?" I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the 14 ceiling tiles and the 2 missed calls and the chair beside my hospital bed and the tote bag full of soup. I thought about the 6:15 flight and the wrinkled jacket, and I've got you set into my hair in the dark. I was in a hospital bed, I said, for 31 hours, and I had 2 people with me the whole time. One of them was my husband. One of them was my husband. One of them was my neighbor. I paused. That was it. That was everyone who showed up. My mother was quiet. "I'm not doing this to punish anyone," I said. "I'm not angry. I'm making different choices now about where my energy goes, and for the first time in a long time, that feels right." "I understand," she said. She didn't sound like she understood. She sounded like she was absorbing something that hadn't finished landing yet. But that was okay. Some things take longer to land. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing in particular. The weather, her garden, something my father had read in the paper. And then we said goodbye, and I hung up. And I sat at the kitchen table for a while listening to the house. Joel was upstairs. I could hear him moving around, the particular creak of the floorboard outside the bedroom that I'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. The late afternoon light was coming through the kitchen window at an angle and landing on the dish towel where my arm rested, and the casserole Deb had made was still in the refrigerator, and outside a bird was doing something noisy in the hedge. It was a very ordinary Tuesday. That was the part that surprised me most. I had expected to feel sad, or triumphant, or like something enormous had shifted. Instead, I just felt settled, like a building that had finally stopped tilting. Like air coming into a room where the window had been painted shut for years. I had spent a long time being the person who showed up for everyone else. I had paid phone bills and covered deposits and stayed on the phone through midnight panics and driven an hour each way to help move furniture for people who couldn't be bothered to take a morning off work when I was lying in a hospital bed on the other side of town. I was done calculating what I was owed. That wasn't the point anymore. The point was simpler than that. When something goes wrong, when the ambulance shows up and the paramedic is still talking and the ceiling tiles are the only stable thing in your field of vision, you find out very quickly who catches the 6:15 flight and who says, "See, you'll have someone." I knew which one I wanted to be. I knew, finally, which ones I was going to stop waiting for. I've thought about that chair a lot. Not the hospital bed, not the CT scan, not even the phone call where my mother said, "See, you'll have Joel like." That was supposed to be enough. I keep coming back to the chair. The fact that Deb drove herself to St. Woodhead, Raphael at 7:30 in the morning with 2 kinds of soup and a crossword puzzle book, for no reason other than that someone she cared about needed a person in that room. She didn't owe me anything. We weren't close in the way people mean when they say close. We waved across driveways. We talked about tomatoes. And yet, when it mattered, when the ceiling tiles were the most stable thing in my field of vision, she was there. And my parents weren't. I used to think that was a cruel irony. Now, I think it was just information. Here's what I've learned, slowly and not without resistance. The life you build reflects the choices you keep making. Not the big dramatic ones, but the small daily ones. Every time I covered a bill that wasn't mine to cover. Every time I drove an hour without being asked and showed up without being thanked. Every time I answered the phone at midnight and stayed on until someone else felt better. I was making a choice about who I was and what I believed about myself. I believed, somewhere underneath all of it, that love had to be earned through usefulness, that if I stopped being useful, I would stop being loved. That belief cost me a long time. And it didn't come from nowhere. It came from watching how my family operated. From learning early which child's needs filled the room, and which ones got managed quietly in the corner. I'm not angry about that anymore. Understanding how something happened is different from excusing it. I can hold both. This is where it came from, and it still wasn't okay. What changed me wasn't the accident. It was the 31 hours after it. It was lying there, running the math. Who showed up? Who didn't? Who booked a flight without being asked? And who said, "Sit tight," and then called back 3 hours later to mention my brother was doing a little better. The math was very simple. And I had been avoiding doing it for years because I knew what it would show. The thing about finally seeing something clearly is that you can't unsee it. You can't choose what to do with it, but you can't go back to not knowing. I said no to $90 a month, and it felt like setting down something I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it wasn't mine. Joel caught the 6:15 flight. Deb brought minestrone and a crossword. My father arrived 19 hours late and raised his voice at a retired chemistry teacher sitting quietly in a chair. I know which people I want to be like. I know who I'm building my life around. And for the first time in a long time, the weight of that decision feels exactly right. not like a loss, but like a window finally opened in a room that had been shut too long.